Hey guys, Pastor Hannah here, and welcome to week 2 of Anthem. To get us started, I have a question for you guys today. Have you ever had something that you forgot that you really should have written down? For me, this happens to me all the time. I go to a lot of meetings, I have a lot of stuff to do, and if I don't write something down, like when I'm supposed to meet with someone, when I'm supposed to go run some errands, when I have an appointment, I will really easily forget. And sometimes I feel like the only reason that I remember to do anything is because now I can tell Siri to remind me. And if you were with us for Lost and Found, you'll remember that my Siri is like a British guy, so I'll be like, hey Siri, remind me to go to this appointment. And he will be like, okay, Hannah, on Thursday at 10 o'clock, don't forget to go to your appointment. And I'm like, oh yeah, thank you, Siri. That's awesome. We all have memories that sometimes fail us, right? I'm sure you can think of something that you forgot to do. Maybe you forgot about a test that you were supposed to be taking. But the thing is, having memories and being able to remember is a really important part of what it means to be human. However, a lot of us are maybe better at looking forward to the future than we are at looking at the past and remembering what has happened. Let's take a minute right now and answer this question. Have you ever used a song or a rhyme to help you remember something important? I know something for me that I've used is that little rhyme that helps you remember how many days are in a month. Like 30 days has September, April, June, and November. All the rest have 31, except for February, which has 28. Go February. And I'm sure that all of us have had the experience of learning the alphabet song, right? A, B, C, D, E, F, G, that song. I remember when I was in university, as part of my degree, I had to learn Greek because parts of the Bible were originally written in Greek, so I had to learn Greek in order to be able to kind of read the Bible in its original language. Greek alphabet is very different. It sounds kind of similar, but it's really different, and I had to do that by learning a song. That's how I remembered it the best, so let's give it a shot. Alpha, beta, gamma, delta, epsilon, zeta, eta, theta, iota, kappa, lambda, mu, nu, psi, omicron, pi, rho, sigma, tau, upsilon, pi, upsilon, phi, keep, psi, omega. Okay, a lot of you are not gonna be able to tell me if that was right or not, but that was 4 or 5 years ago. I still remember my Greek alphabet because I learned that song to help me remember it. Last week we started this series on Anthem, right? And I introduced you to my favorite book of the Bible. Does anyone remember what it is? It's the book of Psalms, and Psalms is a collection of songs, rhythms, rhymes that were written by God's people in the Old Testament for God's people. And remember, we talked about last week how the Psalms were not just beautiful, although many of them are beautiful, but they're also useful. And how worship is not only something beautiful that we do and participate in to give God glory, but it's also really useful. And we're going to talk about one of the uses of the Psalms and of worship today. Just like we have songs to help us remember maybe things like the Greek alphabet or how many days are in a month, the people in this time also used songs to help remind them of things, and mostly it was to help remind them of things that God had done for them. They would write everything down that God had done for them so that they could always remember, and so that the people coming after them could remember as well. So if they were going to be writing things down for us today, it might sound something like this. After years of enslavement, the Israelite slaves have been freed from captivity. God's people are wandering in the wilderness, and God provided quail from the sky. Israel remains undefeated, even though they're small. Their army has been going against these massive armies, and no one can defeat them. Those would be like the kind of news headlines that they would have. And maybe if you are familiar with some of the stories from the Bible, those things sounded like stories that you've heard maybe over and over again. And that's because someone wrote them down because they didn't want us, God's people, to forget what God had done. They want us to always be able to remember. All right, let's take a minute and answer this question. Imagine if God did a miraculous thing today. Imagine if he did a miracle. What would you do to tell other people? What kind of tools or communication do we have access to today that could help us to tell that story? You might say something like, I would write it down in a book so that people could read the book and they would know. Maybe you would make a TikTok about it that could go viral. Maybe you would make up a dance to go with it to help communicate the miracle that God did. Maybe you would call into a news station and say, get the word out. God did this miraculous thing. Of course, if God did something miraculous, we would go above and beyond just saying, well, I'm going to try and remember that God did that. No, in order to get the news out to the most people possible and to remember exactly what God did in detail, we would do things like tweet it out. We would send it in a text. People in the Bible knew this too, and they often did things to help them remember miraculous things that God had done. Sometimes they did things like they stacked huge piles of rocks to help them remember a place. They would sometimes rename places after God had done something miraculous there to help them remember what God had done there. They often established new holidays and new traditions and new feasts so that once a year they could remember what God had done. That's why we have holidays like Christmas and Easter, so that once a year we can remember what God had done for us when he came to earth as a baby and then when he died on the cross and rose again for our sins. And of course, like we're learning about in the Psalms, God's people wrote things down. They wrote down stories and they wrote down songs that would help them remember what God had done. Let's take some time right now and answer another question. Why do you think we often need so many reminders about who God is and what God has done? So today we're going to talk about a certain group of Psalms. They're Psalms 120 to 134, and we're not going to read them all, but they're Psalms that the people of God would sing as they were making their way to some of their feasts. So they were songs that they would sing to help them remember who God was. And I thought that instead of reading them to you today, we would have a little bit of a competition. So we're going to divide you guys into 3 groups, and each group is going to get a psalm. And I've got some candy that I provided for your leaders as well. And here's the competition. You're going to look at your psalm and you're going to try and pull out either some themes from the psalm. So what is kind of the message that the psalm is saying? Or some things that we can learn about God from those psalms. If your team comes up with 3 or 4 solid themes or things you can learn about God, then you will get some candy today, my friends. So we are going to divide you into 3 groups. One group is going to get Psalm 121, one group is going to get Psalm 124, and one group is going to get Psalm 130. And leaders, you can help in this exercise a little bit, but try and see if your students can pull some themes out of these Psalms. I'll see you in a little bit once you've got that done. All right, how did that go? Did more than one group find 3 or 4 solid themes? Man, I love digging into these Psalms and finding some themes. As you were reading, you may have found themes like this. God's people are in trouble. Enemies are attacking. We have to put our trust in God. God rescues and helps us. God hears our prayers. And God did something amazing. If you found any one of these themes or something similar to that, congratulations. You have successfully understood kind of how to read these Psalms. And really, how we read these Psalms boils down to an even more simple formula. They all kind of read the same way when we look at them. And here are the 4 things that each of these Psalms have. The first thing is that they all have a moment where the psalmist says, I'm in trouble or we're in trouble. So that's step number 1. The second thing that each psalm has is an idea that we called to God and God heard us. We called out to God and God heard us. And then the third thing that each of these psalms has is a theme that says, when we trust God, God helps us. Maybe you could see that in the psalm that you were reading. And finally, each psalm kind of ends with God being deserving of our praise. We have a lot in common with God's people today. In fact, we know that in these Psalms, God saves people from maybe individual armies or circumstances, but we know, now that we have the New Testament as well, that God sent Jesus to save all of us from the ultimate enemy, which is sin and death. And because we know that, we can worship God in this exact same way. We can remember what God has done for us on the cross through Jesus, and we can remember all the times that God has come through for us because we know and we follow Jesus. We may not always be good at remembering all the details, but we can get in the habit of worshiping God for what He's done. And this is the usefulness of worship for this week, that we can worship to help us remember what God has done. So let's take a minute to answer another question. Other than singing, what are some ways that we can remember what God has done for us? All right, I'm gonna hit you guys here with a little bit of science. This is the science behind memory. So remembering things isn't just a nice thing to do, but it actually really helps our brains. Scientists who study the human brain have observed something called neuroplasticity. Neuroplasticity. They've learned from brain scans that people who spend time each day remembering what God has done through prayer and worship actually increase the neuroplasticity in their brains. And so this is what this means for us, because I'm like, what does that mean? It means that actually the more time that you spend in focused prayer and worship, the stronger the neural connections are in your brain. And the easier it becomes for you to make prayer and worship a habit. So increasing this neuroplasticity helps us to find it easier to remember things. The easier it becomes for you to make prayer and worship a habit, the more real and personal your faith becomes. In other words, even if you have a moment when you're not feeling full of faith, worship God anyway, because your brain actually changes every time that you worship God to help you to remember what God has done. I think that's a really cool thing about the way that God has designed our brains. Let's take a minute and answer another question. How can remembering what God has done for us help us in times of doubt or difficulty? Have you ever had an experience like this? What happened when you remembered who God is or what He has done for us? I want to leave you today with something really practical that you can do in your own life to help you remember what God has done for you, and that is journaling. Do you keep a journal? Does it help you to remember things that you may have forgotten about? For me personally, I keep a prayer journal because I find it really hard to focus if I'm just closing my eyes and being quiet, so I have to journal out what my prayers are. And it's amazing to me to look back through my journal and see all the ways that God came through for me. And every once in a while, I'll take a look back through past journals and it will help me to remember all the ways that God has provided for me, all the things that He's done for me, all the times I was in trouble, but God helped me through it. So this week, I would love for you to try journaling. And not just journaling, but you can actually write your own psalm of praise to God based on the same formula that we've already been talking about. You can write your psalm this way. 1, identify a struggle or a challenge that you've been experiencing. 2, think about how you called out to God and how you maybe understood how God heard you or answered your prayer. 3, identify how trusting in God helped you to get through that situation, even though you didn't know what was going to be coming next. 4, think about ways or reasons that God deserves praise because of how He helped you in that situation. And if you do all 4 of those things, boom, you've just written your own psalm right there. And that's pretty awesome. So this week, try writing your own psalm, try journaling, try reading through the Bible and read through some psalms that talk about how the people of God remembered all the things that God had done for them and how it helped them to trust and to live their lives in a way that was worshipful and praising of God. Let's take some time to answer one more question today. It's a super practical one. This week, what's one thing that you can do to remember what God has done for you? I hope you guys have a great week, and I'll see you next week for week 3 of Anthem.